me today. So I've got Patrick Ogwu, who's a senior consultant at DSJ Global. I've got Renaud Anjaran, who's the founder of Sofeast, and I've got Regina Peterbergsky from Women on Amazon. Hello, everyone. How are you doing?
Hi, terrific. Thanks, Megla. Thrilled to be here.
Thanks a lot for joining joining our panel discussion today. So first of all, can you introduce yourselves and tell us your background and how you've been involved in the sourcing industry? So Patrick, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that little introduction of my name. So my name is Patrick, and I'm a senior consultant at DSJ Global. So DSJ Global, we are a leading end-to-end supply chain recruitment brand. So what I mean by end-to-end, it's like basically like, from your plan, make, deliver, and improve. So we basically source for professionals across the APAC region, whether it's like your procurement, manufacturing, engineering, and I've been in Hong Kong for 10 years, and basically I've been interacting with a lot of professionals. So that's how I basically got involved in the procurement and sourcing, and it's been a lovely journey so far.
Awesome. Well, Renaud, what about you? You're also calling in from Hong Kong, right?
I am, yes. Hello. I've been involved in, let's say, the Chinese and manufacturing environment for 15 years. I'm the founder of Sofeast, which is a firm that basically helps importers build their supply chains in China and Southeast Asia with transparency and control, two very important keywords.
Absolutely. Regina, what about you? You're dialing in from Australia.
I am dialing in from Australia, and my use of supply chains is as a consumer. I'm an Amazon seller and have been selling on Amazon for just over almost exactly 5 years now. In fact, it'll be August 1st, will be my 5th anniversary for my first product landing on Amazon Australia. I now sell in US, Australia and Europe. So I consume supply chain and logistics products. And also I now help other sellers as well.
Right, absolutely. Thanks for that. So, okay, all of you guys watching, I'm going to be asking our panel a few questions, but I also want to see your questions. So feel free to type your questions in the comments box right below the video, and I will read out your questions to our panelists here. Okay, so my first question to you guys is, what are some of the changes that you've seen in the sourcing industry and supply chain management over the last few months because of the disruption that COVID-19 has caused? So Patrick, why don't you go first?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Megla. So, we all know that COVID-19 has started like a couple of months ago, and it started from China, and with that, there's been a lockdown in Wuhan. That's the key area where it started from. As we know, China is a factory, like the world's factories, as China has over 41 large industrial categories, and this has actually affected the supply chain system because China was locked down. You weren't able to have movement outside China. So basically we've seen a lot of restrictions at this spot, and what is now going on is in the area of a de-risking strategy, because what I mean by de-risking strategy is more of the geographical diversification and vertical integration, because when activities are focused in one country, like if anything happens, there's going to be a lot of issues that would arise. So that's what we've seen over the past few months, and now what organizations, institutions are looking to do now, and what they've actually been doing on a short-term to a long-term basis. Now, de-risking strategy, which is basically looking at how to diversify, that's the productions, the supply chains across the region. So, for example, in Asia, I focus in recruiting across the APAC region. What we've seen now is that companies are looking to like move further into Southeast Asia, and moving further into Southeast Asia gives them that leverage of having multiple ways. Whether it's not just China, but they're looking at Thailand, they're looking at Vietnam, they're looking at Indonesia, they're looking at India, and well, this actually doesn't affect our clients' hiring strategy for sourcing, because basically we cover the supply chain talent recruitment across the region. So we've been working closely with them across this region, and this is something that we are seeing now. Like everyone's thinking of how to like de-risk the strategy rather than focusing on one location. You're looking at focusing on multiple locations within the region, because that would give them the same, more or less the same, give them more opportunities to be able to like deliver at a certain time and within at the same quality.
Right. I think that phrase de-risking strategy, that really makes sense. A lot of people have also been talking about a China plus one strategy where they're diversifying their sourcing. But yeah, I really like that phrase, de-risking. Renaud, what about you?
So Patrick is right. There was like a supply shock in February and March, not just in China, but all the countries that sort of relied on Chinese-made components and materials. And then after that, actually, the biggest shock was more of a demand shock. I'm looking at the supplier base. A lot of their customers froze the shipments for a while, and the payments, of course, canceled orders and things like that. So an enormous amount of uncertainty, I would say, that's for sure. Patrick is right. De-risking is really at the fore, in everybody's mind. I would not call it China plus one. I would call it as the Chinese supply chain, and then there would be ideally another supply chain, separate supply chain that does not rely on China, right? It's not just like China and then Vietnam, but half of the components come from China. This is actually a lot of people now are understanding that this is a little bit risky. Now, to get back to the question, what are the changes that we've seen actually from the people making these decisions is actually a lot of searching, a lot of talking, a lot of thinking, but not much action, not many changes, except with some very large companies. But SMEs usually are kind of frozen in their tracks and are not really sure what to do. Situation keeps changing every week or every couple of weeks. So a lot of analysis and thinking, but actually not that much transfer of manufacturing and not that much action.
Right. Regina, what about you as a consumer or as a sourcer? Yes.
Well, yes, like in my personal business, it has really had a number of knock-on effects. I mean, I had products that were being manufactured in China in January, and normally, with Chinese New Year that there is a lag, and so I had placed my orders early, and I knew that once the factories got back from Chinese New Year, so I had all my strategies in place to get the stock out, and then of course we got hit with COVID, so I was personally affected in that my factories did not open for a number of weeks, as we know, and then of course there was the next whammy was air freight, because once China opened, the rest of the world started closing, and the planes stopped flying. And what some people don't realise is that a lot of the freight actually goes in the passenger aircraft, so it's not just dedicated freight aircraft. A lot of freight is moved with passenger air freight, and so once the passengers stopped flying, whether through choice or through government mandate, a lot of the capacity of air was no longer available, and that is still the case. So, whereas normally we would make up for delays in production by flying some product in quickly, all of a sudden that particular avenue was no longer available. Well, it was, but at 3, 4, 5 times normal price that we would pay, which makes it, financially not viable. So that was like the double whammy for me personally. So I ended up putting product on boats going both to the US and the UK. And now, of course, because of what's going on in America with COVID and the Amazon warehouses, we've got the third hit in that Amazon is starting to limit the number of products that we can, or number of units of given products that we can ship directly into Amazon. So as sellers, we are looking at alternatives, and different sellers are looking at different ways. Some are holding their inventory in China and shipping small amounts into Amazon directly from China. Others are shipping to a third-party warehouse and then shipping small deliveries, which again adds to our costs and the complexity of our supply chains. So we've really had the triple whammy as sellers dealing with certainly with US Amazon in that way. So and that really doesn't seem to matter whether you're a small seller or a large seller. So all sellers have been hit with those three things. And people that I've been working with, I've had people who are looking to start selling that have actually pulled back and said, look, it's just too hard, it's too complicated, I'm going to go back and do something else. And this is people who've put in a lot of effort and energy to starting an Amazon business that have basically said, no, look, I'll look at it again next year when things hopefully are a little bit easier. So, that's not great for the seller community when that happens, because, we want the seller community to grow and, for entrepreneurs to get better and to grow. So, that's been the effect of COVID so far in 2020. But hey, we're only in end of July. There's still 5 months to go. So we'll see what happens next, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Regina, let me stay with you for the next question. Of course, there are some short-term implications, and there are also some short-term implications, and there are also some long-term implications, right? So what are some risks that you... Sorry, I can hear someone talking in the background. I'm getting a bit distracted.
Yeah. So what was your question, Megla?
Yes, my question was, what are some risks you think importers face, in the short term and also in the long term? And how do you mitigate these risks?
Oh, look, that's such a huge question, and I'm not sure whether I'm the correct person to answer, but I'll try.
From your perspective, yes.
So look, the risks are, in allocation of scarce resources, for cash flow. That's a really big, where are we going to put our cash flow? If it's harder to get product into Amazon, do we put our money into selling on other channels? Do we invest in building relationships with fulfillment centers to sell across other channels? Those of us who are pure play Amazon sellers, we're used to sending it to Amazon and not worrying about it. Okay, so this is something that we are looking to, medium and long term to say, okay, well, is this something that I really need to look at as part of my overall business strategy? Short term, again, with the decisions we're making, do I want to fly products in, or, am I prepared to pay the costs that are associated with flying products in, or do I just wait, the extra time that it takes to ship it in? Does that answer that question? I'm sort of forgotten where we started with.
Yeah, it's not easy, huh? So are you also looking at other markets to, diversify your sourcing? Is that something that...
Look, and I think that's, and a lot of sellers are, and I think it very much depends on your products and categories. The products that I personally sell are very much China-based type of products. However, I know many sellers are diversifying and looking at other countries. I mean, obviously, Megla, you're the queen of Indian sourcing, and I recommend a lot of people to work with what you do, and they're looking at India. And India itself has its own challenges, which I'm personally not able to speak to, but I'm sure other people can. But I think it is a very good idea, especially for sellers who are just starting out and are starting their sourcing, who don't already have strong relationships with factories like perhaps longer term sellers like I do. It's a terrific opportunity to be looking at other countries, whether that's India or Taiwan or Bali, other Southeast Asian countries, or even in the countries that they're selling. If you're selling in the US, are you able to source in the US? If you're selling in Europe, are you able to source in Europe? So I know that sellers are looking at that. And I guess if I was a brand new seller starting a brand new brand, I would very much be looking at alternatives, both short and long term.
Right, totally makes sense. Renaud, let me come to you. So what are some risks you think importers and sourcing professionals face, in the short term and also in the long term?
Well, in the short term, we actually just did a survey last week, so I can tell you some of the pain points and risks that buyers from Chinese suppliers only. That's only with Chinese suppliers that they're complaining about. Number one is production takes longer, and there's a higher proportion of shipment delays, which kind of makes sense because when demand really went down, a lot of Chinese manufacturing plants actually laid some staff off and sort of tried to operate on a lean crew. But that means now it's much harder for them to ramp up. And also they might not go full in simply because they know that there might be another lockdown, in some of the countries where their customers operate or sell in the next few weeks, next few months, right? Actually, nobody knows. So demand plunged, then sort of rose up really fast, and it might crumble again later on. Nobody knows. So the first one is really a problem of capacity and timing. Another one is a lot of people say that some of their suppliers actually shut their factory for 1, 2, 3 weeks at one point simply because they didn't have enough work. But fortunately, pretty much all of them reopened. So that's not really very high on the list of the risks, I would say. We asked about prices, but there's nothing really coming out very clearly that's different, from what would happen usually. Quality issues, that's a major risk because when they get rid of staff, they get rid of some key staff also, and that has a direct impact on the reliability of their productions, right? This is also related to the fact that, as I say, the situation has been changing every week or every couple of weeks since February, basically, and people don't think long term. When people don't think long term, they don't really try to keep systems in place. They don't really try to keep applying the hard learnings that they've earned over time, right? If we make this mistake, if we do that, then we might have this very serious issue, and the customers are going to complain again, and everything. All of that goes out of the window in some of the factories, right? And we've seen also in our factory audits, product inspections across a variety of different product lines, there are more inconsistent performances, let's say, from suppliers on these points. And then the last one, because I don't want to bore you to death with all these things, but actually a lot of people say that Chinese suppliers are harder to work with than last year, and I'm a little bit surprised by that. I would think that when demand goes down and they really want to keep their customers happy, they would try to make some efforts. But some people say that it's been difficult. Now it might be difficult also because they have lower capacity, as we said. Very often because they haven't really been keeping the systems up. Maybe because there are more quality issues. People understand the questions differently, so I don't want to give it too much importance, but a lot of people complain about that. So these are some of the risks that actually people complained about, just last week. Yeah.
Right. So I'm going to ask the follow-up question, Renaud, to you. How can buyers mitigate these risks?
Well, in the short term, that's a tough one because they typically cannot come on site, right? So if it's a large company, they will have a buying office and they will have some staff to go and keep visiting the factories to pinpoint what the main risks are, to really see when a factory is sort of letting themselves down, not keeping their systems up and everything, maybe some of the key people who disappeared and so on. But if you're far away, that's difficult. There are service providers that can help you with that. Obviously, there's a lot of them actually in China. In the mid to long term, there's so many things that can be done. As we said, developing an alternative supply chain that is less reliant and not reliant on China, that would be a big one in the grand scheme of things. It's also related to, it's not just on the sourcing side, it's also the distribution channels. I think Regina talked about that. Do you, if you have like 10 stores, do you keep selling only on the stores? Do you try to do a big push on e-commerce? And, that makes a lot of sense. Do you try to push for some digitization initiatives in your company and with your suppliers and try to keep things better aligned, let's say, with some regular meetings and maybe e-audits and things like that to really keep your finger on the pulse of what's going on at the manufacturing level and in your supply chain more widely. I mean, there's a lot of things that could be done to mitigate the risks, but in the very short term, as I said, when you asked the first question, not that much action, not that many changes that we've seen.
Mm-hmm. Right, makes sense. So, Patrick, I'm going to pose the same question to you now. What sort of risks do you think importers face in the short term and long term, and what are some ways to mitigate those risks?
Yeah, I believe Reynald has touched on a couple of areas that I think are really, really important, and that's what a lot of importers and sourcing professionals are thinking of now, and it comes with a delay that follows with the whole restrictions and with the whole with the fact that they can't make any shipments out. But what I wanted to highlight on more is on quality control, and as I've mentioned that a trend that we are seeing now is that sourcing professionals or companies are looking to de-risk and diversify into different regions. So with reliance and focus on China, if this has to take place, there's going to be that part where they're thinking about quality as well too. Quality would always play an important role. So basically looking at new suppliers, the suppliers that I would be further working with now, whether it's in Thailand, would they be giving me the same quality as the suppliers I've been working with in China? So quality is always going to be a big part, when it comes to selecting new suppliers, because ultimately you want to deliver a product that is defect free, that would arrive on time. So there are certain characteristics of products that each company or sourcing professional wants to achieve. So quality would always be a key thing. And I don't mean to sound a bit biased, but one thing that I think mitigating this risk, I think it will boil down to talent. And one thing that I've seen is leaders would always relook on your supply chain strategy and reevaluate the current situation. For example, if you're looking to diversify into a different country, you have to start working with suppliers that or basically get a sourcing team locally that would help you in terms of basically making sure that you're getting the right supplies you need, you're getting the right product quality. So definitely I think it would boil down to talent and how are you sourcing for these talents locally. And the second point I want to touch again would be on quality again, like mitigating this risk. Talent is key, and then it comes down to quality. It's always been an important part of a supply chain process. So with this changes, vendor and high demand from customers, the demand for quality control will continue to increase. So right now, how do you mitigate this risk? Looking at your quality, like setting up quality standards. I mean, you will still have your supply audits and compliance that you have to follow through, but now it's about like trying to make sure that the standards you have in China would be like more or less the similar standards that you have for suppliers, that just to make sure that they are meeting the same product standards that you've been delivering to your customers in the past.
Right. I think that totally makes sense. And of course, I think building a good experienced sourcing team is even more important now because there are, so many travel restrictions and all. You can't simply, go to China and visit the factory. So you want to make sure that you have, boots on the ground that are actually experienced and know what they're doing. So I totally agree with that. That's super important.
And
okay, go ahead.
Sorry, no, and I was just going to add that this is where, getting the right people as well too, because you don't just want to hire someone that would be able to get the job done, but you want to hire someone that will be thinking of the future as well too, because there are a lot of changes happening, and we've seen digitalization coming into play. So you want to make sure that you're getting the right talent on board. So definitely. Talent plays a big role in the diversification of resources or sourcing strategies.
Right. So, Patrick, let's delve a little bit deeper into that, because I think that's super important. And feel free to promote your services here. But how can people find good talent? Let's say I'm in the U.S. and I want to look for. Maybe I want to set up a team in China, or look for maybe somebody who can find good suppliers and do some supplier vetting and all. Where do we start?
So finding suppliers and also talent, I think the number one thing would be you have to have a certain requirement. Like, if you're looking for suppliers in a certain region, you have to think of, okay, how can these suppliers deliver in terms of what are you trying to achieve? What are your requirements? Like, am I looking for a supplier that would deliver within a certain time frame? Am I looking for a supplier that would get me the right quality that I need? So the first thing I would say, you have to have like a requirements, a standard set out as to what you want to achieve. And then the next thing would be like, how do you execute this the strategy? How do you plan on going on with the sourcing activity? So I think definitely these two things are what I would be highlighting on the requirements, because I believe if you have a good foundation on what type of requirements you have, it would be easy for you to navigate through as to what is right or as to what is wrong, or as to whether you are meeting your set standards, or as to whether you're meeting your set requirements. Not sure if that addressed your question, but I think it all boils down to what standards have you set in place, what requirements have you had, what's the goal, what's the overall vision. So that boils down to the requirements.
Right. I totally agree with that. I mean, of course, each buyer is different. You're sourcing in different quantities. You're targeting different, markets. So you have to be very clear about what your requirements are.
Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, so let's go on to the next question now. Inventory planning. And, Renaud, I'm sure you have come across a lot of, your buyers that face this issue. They've placed a large order and then suddenly there's no demand. And then, suddenly there is demand. So they need to rush production for a certain order. So how are your buyers and you, planning inventory? And what advice do you have for importers and brands to manage inventory forecasts?
Well, the first thing is, with hindsight, everybody wishes they had more inventory just this past Chinese New Year, right?
Yes.
How to mitigate the risk? You can always say more inventory. Of course, then you have the corresponding risk of having stuff in warehouses that sits there forever and that never sells and takes up all of your working capital. So it's always a trade-off, right? There's if you want to take supply chain risk in consideration in your decisions for how much inventory to hold, there's a pretty good model that was developed together by a Ford Motor Company and an MIT professor called Simchi Levy, and that was just after 2011. I don't know if you remember. You had the tsunami in Japan, you had the floods in Thailand. Ford was really hit, and some others also, a bunch of other companies, and they said, okay, how can we avoid that in the future? So they wanted it in a systematic manner that is not very easy for small buyers to do. I don't expect most, for example, most FBA sellers to go through all this exercise, but it's good to think about it. And larger companies that really have the means to put a lot of resources behind it actually can usually achieve that. So first is you map your supply chain, not just who am I buying from, but that piece of whatever die cast metal. Okay, it's die cast here, then there's a surface treatment here, then a second surface treatment here, then another one here, then it's machined here at the end, and then it's sent to us, right? So you try to have an idea, and if they're not transparent, at least you can say tier one, I know who they are, I buy from them, and then like tier two is whatever, ABC, XYZ. You might not be able to have all the identities, but at least try to understand where all of this is, because then when there's something goes wrong, for example, in Wuhan, you can right away say, oh, okay, we have nobody there. That's great. We're fine, right? And the second thing is try to understand the time to disruption. The time to recover. After a disruption. So that's the first. There's two numbers you need. Time to recover from a disruption. So if they're hit, how long is it going to take them to get back to normal operations? And then what's the cost for your company during this time? So if it's take them 1 month to get back to normal, because maybe they had a fire in their warehouse, maybe whatever happened, they had to close. For that 1 month, you don't have enough inventory. What's the bottom line impact on you? And that once you have this cost, this bottom line impact on your company, then you can start to really prioritize. Here it's really too high. I need to have some more inventory buffers at some points in my supply chain. It might not be in my warehouse. It might be in my supplier's warehouse, in a VMI warehouse somewhere, in my customers, somewhere in my distribution channel. I need to push some more inventory. This really drives some decisions where you can see the highest risks, right? The highest impact risks, I should say, because most of the models out there, they try to estimate, what's the probability that this goes wrong and that this goes wrong and that this goes wrong. And then the problem with these models is that they're always very wrong. That's the only thing that they have in common. So instead of wondering, what's the risk of a fire? What's the risk of a tsunami? What's the risk of a flood? What's the risk of a landslide and all these kind of things, and a pandemic and so on? You wonder, okay, some bad stuff's going to happen. We have to take that into account. At least let's know what nodes in our supply chain will be more painful if there's disruption. Then what can we do there, right? It's not just about inventory, of course. It might be double sourcing. It might be working with them. So maybe they, instead of manufacturing in one place, they manufacture in two places. It might be pushing them to hold some extra inventory about a specific part. There's a lot of things can be done.
Right, totally makes sense. So talking about transparency in the supply chain, how easy is it for buyers to get that kind of transparency, and or is it just overrated?
You want me to answer this one?
Yes, run on.
My experience on this is, if you have this in mind when you are setting your supply chain, and this is one of the key considerations that the people doing the sourcing and talking to the potential suppliers and so on have right there front of mind, and it's in the first contract that they have to sign and everything. We want the full bill of material. We want the full information. At least you can usually get, of course, tier one suppliers, the one you buy from, but also you can often get to know tier two, which is their suppliers, right? So it might give you some extra work. You might have to go and do that work for the critical components, because maybe this one is like, they treat it as such a secret. They will not tell you what that specific component or that specific processing is made. Then you have to go and figure out where it's where is a good source for that, and then direct it to them. And maybe they will say, well, okay, you know what? Okay, here's where I buy it, and I'm more comfortable with them, and I can tell you because I don't want to work with these other guys. But at least when you do the work and you're really organized and you want that from the very beginning, it does help, even for a relatively small company. Because even if you're going to buy volumes that are not very large, if it's a new product, your supply chain you're setting up from the start, you're going to try to work with companies that are also not very large, so you're not a very small fish for them, right? And you can usually do that if it takes, again, some organization and often some extra work, right? Mm-hmm. Now, if you're going to go, let's say you go on Global Sources and you see a sample that you like, and you're just going to stick your logo on it, just private label, not going to work. It's not going to work. Okay, I have to put that aside right away. Not going to work because you're just a distributor, basically, of these companies. You're doing ODM business. I'm talking more OEM or contract manufacturer business.
Right, absolutely. Okay, Regina, let me come to you and let's talk about, as an e-commerce seller, how do you do your inventory planning? And of course, you have maybe the opposite problem because the demand of your products is probably skyrocketing. So, but how have you managed inventory planning, in the last couple of months?
Look, it's we're just throwing stuff against a wall and seeing what sticks. Look, I think I consider myself a small business, and I'm a single person operator, and we're juggling so many different things, and so inventory planning is sort of quite low on our priorities. It's like, okay, I'm running out, better put an order in. And so this is something that most of us don't realise when we get into an Amazon type or an online business, how important inventory planning actually is. Because I've been in both situations where recently I've been running out of stock, but I have been in situations where I over-ordered and I've been stuck with stock. And sort of getting that balance is really, really hard, and I don't have an answer, and I think people like Renaud and people of that ilk are probably more able to answer those sorts of questions. But for Amazon sellers and small online retailers, it's actually one of those things that we tend not to think about when we go into the business, because we're more worried about have I got a great product? Is it going to sell? And I think it's a topic that needs to be more at the forefront of the conversation for sellers moving forward. Because we do take it for granted, and yet what 2020 has shown us is that we can't take it for granted, and that it is something. And I've been counselling sellers who are looking, I sell in America, should I go to Europe? And I'm like, well, you can, and you'll make money. However, you're tying up cash flow by having inventory going to Europe, and now with Brexit, you can't just send it to one place. You've got to send it to at least the UK and at least one other port in Europe. So that's 2 places that you're sending it to. So these inventory planning is becoming more and more important as we're trying to start and grow our businesses.
Absolutely, and I think small businesses, entrepreneurs, they probably need to be a little more aware of what's happening on the sourcing side, with their supplier. They need to, talk to the supplier on a regular basis and find out whether they're, laying off employees or what's the situation with the supply chains.
And that comes back to building the relationship. So whether you're dealing directly with your factory or you're using a sourcing agent, and I've done both, or if you're using, another third-party supply chain type of organisation, it's having those boots on the ground and having relationships with people who've got boots on the ground, because our days of visiting factories, unfortunately, I can't see that happening for a good 6, maybe 12 months or more. So it's really important that we build relationships of trust with people who are doing not just our sourcing, but, etc., and having that open lines of communication where we can monitor our sales and at the same time know what's going on with the factories. So I'm just echoing what the other people on the panel have said. But from a seller's point of view, as I said, then, often supply chains are sort of very low on our priorities until there's a problem. And that's something that needs to be addressed in the seller community, that we need to bump up the whole supply chain issue further up our list of priorities from the very beginning.
Right. Makes sense. Okay, guys watching, I want to see your questions for the panel here. I see a few comments, but no questions yet. So yeah, feel free to type your questions in the comment section here. Okay, so Patrick, let me ask you something. So how do you think brands and importers should source differently in view of what's going on? I mean, what are some changes that importers need to make, whether it's in their supply chain or whether it's in the way they set up their teams? What are some changes that you think need to be made?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think it all goes down to decentralizing your sourcing, because I mean, with what has happened now, that has given us a light to see that I mean, going towards the future, that these could potentially happen where, like, if you focus on one sourcing area as your means of like basically getting your goods, I mean, potentially in the future there's a risk of, like, I don't know, like any political thing going on or like any uncontrollable circumstance. You definitely have to basically need supplies from a different supply in a different region. So this has basically like just thrown the light that, hey, we have to basically decentralize how we do our sourcing activities. And I think that's what I've been saying from the beginning as a trend that is really growing, and that's like de-risking. Okay, from one country, it could be like from China, okay, having one supplier in China, having another supplier in Vietnam, having another supplier in Thailand, or having another supplier in Singapore. So basically, when you have multiple supplies, I mean, you would be basically ready to go when there is I don't know, like an uncontrollable circumstance or something that you can't handle globally, just like we've seen, just like COVID-19 has presented us. So that is something that I believe suppliers, that I believe sourcing professionals or people importing should start thinking of. Okay, can I be able to like further grow from one country into another country by further like growing my supply base, growing my supply pool? Like, can I grow from having one supplier in this region, in this country, to having multiple suppliers? So that is something that I think supplies and brands, sourcing professionals and brands should start thinking of how to just grow that platform to having multiple, and it will definitely be in the favor of a company, because now you're able to make that comparison of like, okay, where am I getting a lot of input from? Where am I getting a lot of, where am I seeing more results from? And now it could go into like the cost to serve as well too, which is something that is actually growing in the logistics space as well too. So cost to serve, like you're looking at the supply that serves you more in terms of like basically quality, and also in terms of like of how like I don't want to use the word cheap, because cheap, we always tend to associate the word that term to something of bad quality. But yeah, I think for a lot of like sourcing professionals is how they can basically negotiate for the best, more of like a win-win situation, whereby you're getting good quality and you're getting like a decent enough price. So I think the foundation comes down to like diversification of sourcing strategies.
Right. I think that's totally accurate. However, I also see some challenges that people face when diversifying. So, for example, when people source from India or Vietnam, a lot of the materials or components are again sourced from China. So that sometimes causes issues as well. For example, in India, the leather industry is exporting a lot of products. However, the zippers and buttons, those components are being imported from China. So that poses challenges as well. So, but you're right. I think diversification is just so important. So, Renaud, let me come to you with the same question. What changes do you think importers, brands need to make? And you touched upon a few of, the strategies in your earlier answer. But let's hear what you have to say about specific changes that brands and importers need to make.
Sure. So there's been a lot of things said about diversification. So I'm going to try to be a little bit contrarian, just just to make sure we don't leave any corners and check here. So basically, if you work with a key supplier or two key suppliers, you have some weight over and they really listen to you, you are in an interesting situation. What companies of a certain size have been doing much more recently is to request for a BCP, a business continuity plan, right? Mm-hmm. So it basically is, please, guys, sit down, make a list of your the risks that you are exposed to, and sort of prioritize the risks, and try to set things in place to mitigate that, and give us that document. Again, you need to have some weight over them. You cannot be customer number 25, right? So once you have this, you can actually work with them. This supplier might have to make some work in their supply chain. Maybe that specific process or component is really potentially a big bottleneck. If something goes wrong here, it is so unique, or it took so long to really fine-tune it exactly to the needs, so to be consistent with the quality standard and everything. We need to have it at least double-sourced, right? To have a backup supplier for that. Yes. That's an example. Maybe that long lead time component, maybe we need to actually have more inventory again, right? Because if something goes wrong there, we might be left in the water for 2 months with nothing, right? So it's called a business continuity plan. It really looks at everything that can disrupt your business in a way that you actually can no longer have continuity of supply, which is really, really bad, right? Nobody would say, oh, this is a little risk. This is a very serious risk. So when you see some potential failures, some potential disruptions at some points in the supply chain, again, without really thinking of exactly what might have triggered it, because you don't want to go too deep into that kind of analysis. But if for whatever reason this is no longer available, then what happens? How can we mitigate that again, right? And as I said, maybe if it's a certain size of business, maybe you can impose for 24/7 monitoring. This is not unheard of. Actually, a lot of companies are starting to do that, so that they actually know right away when there's some kind of disruption. They might keep some inventory in some warehouses outside of maybe the main supplier, because if there's a fire or if there's a very serious problem in that area, then maybe we can still use that inventory. Maybe there's a backup plan to use that, and we'll be much less constrained if we have that extra inventory of these very specific components. There's insurance, as I said, digitizing the processes, making communication more systematic without having to visit them face to face. All of them is very important. And the last thing I would say is, if you have one or two key suppliers, you really don't want them to go down. So you also need to work with them to see if financially maybe they need some better terms from you. Maybe they need some help from you actually to ensure they can survive, because some of them are really going through a very bad patch maybe.
Right. So we have one question, and this is for Patrick. What are the in-demand skills for supply chains and procurement professionals for APAC in the future?
Oh, interesting question. And I think I was actually going to speak about this, touching in the area of Industry 4.0, because I'm sure everyone's aware that of the next industrial revolution that we're going through, which is more of the connectivity. Like, you have a lot of data, and basically, how do you read this data? How do you process it? Looking at our robotic process automation, looking at Internet of Things. So the next skills for supply chain and procurement professionals, I'll divide it into two. The first would be the hard skills, and then the soft skills. On the hard skills, I would say basically arming yourself with data analytics tools. How do you, excuse me, how do you read this data? How do you interpret this data? Because right now we have basically companies having what we call like big data. So basically, how do you process this? How do you analyze it? Whether it's through an Excel spreadsheet, because on the supply chain part, you'll be dealing with a lot with forecasting, with a lot of numbers. So how are these numbers being processed, and how are we able to leverage it to the benefit of the business in the future? So arming yourself with data analytics skills. Also, like right now, you have a lot of like machine learning, artificial intelligence boot camp or coding classes. So it would be also good to try or like enroll yourself in one of these classes, because at the rate we are moving, you have a lot of companies looking at arming or upskilling their staff with these skills. So rather than you can propose this to your manager, but individually, if you're looking at a growth mindset type of situation, you have to basically arm yourself with what it's basically like the basics of machine learning or artificial intelligence. And on the soft skill part, I believe this has to do with negotiation skills. Also looking at, this should be the primary skill, but also looking at stakeholder management, internal and external stakeholders, like because you would be interacting with different suppliers. As Reynald mentioned, you have to be able to understand some of the pain points your suppliers are going through. So you have to be able to possess that stakeholder management, external, internal, and also looking at communication skills. And because you're dealing with people, you're not dealing with computers, you're not dealing with robots, you're dealing with human beings. So like you have to arm yourself as to how do you present yourself in a more personable way. Don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, two different skill sets: soft, hard skills. On the hard skill, it's dealing with data analytics, and on the soft part is more of the relational aspect. That's basically from the stakeholder point to the interpersonal and the communications aspects too.
Okay, yeah, that totally makes sense. Okay, we have another question from Anthony Galvin. So I think, Regina, you might be able to answer this. So he's asking, any suggestions for finding products with smaller MOQs and better profits?
Well, that's the holy grail. That is the holy grail, isn't it? Small MOQs and higher profits. Generally, traditionally, when dealing with suppliers, the smaller your MOQ, the lower your profit is going to be, because, it's more expensive to make a smaller number of units. However, in the current times, as Renaud mentioned, a lot of the factories are finding it difficult to find work. So now is probably a really good time to be negotiating with factories for smaller MOQs. They're more likely to talk to you than perhaps they were 12, 18 months or so ago. And they're more likely to take you seriously, especially if you're starting out and you're looking to build a long-term relationship. So you're more likely to be able to go back perhaps to factories that said no to you before and say, hey, given the current time, I'm looking to build a long-term relationship. Will you talk to me about a smaller MOQ at a price that we can both make money on? I've never been one to screw a factory on profits because I want them to remain in business in the long term. So I'm happy for them to make money, because if they're not making money, they won't be able to help me make money in the future. And again, factories will give you a lower price. However, they will, as a consequence, have to give up something in terms of quality. So, and I can't remember who it was on a webinar that mentioned, when you're dealing with a factory, instead of asking them, well, can you make it cheaper? How about you ask them, well, if I give you an extra $1 per unit, what more could I get for that dollar? So it's a matter of switching thinking and, what is the best quality I can get, in terms of bang for my buck that I can then pass on to my ultimate consumer. So that's your thing. So maybe do that. Okay. If I have a smaller MOQ, what can you give me in terms of bang for my buck? In terms of building a long-term relationship. So switch your thinking. Instead of saying what's the smallest MOQ, cheapest, maybe you can get more profit if you have a more expensive product, right? That's really something that often, if you have a more expensive product, you can get more profit, and then it's a win-win for everybody. That's my thing, is switch your thinking. Instead of screwing your supplier, create a win-win for everybody, for yourself, for your factory, and for your ultimate end user. If you create a better mousetrap, consumers will pay more for it.
Absolutely. It's all about building partnerships and growing together, isn't it? Yeah. All right. So we have one more question. I'm not sure who can answer this. So can you advise on sourcing and related issues in the United Arab Emirates? Anyone familiar with what works in the UAE in terms of sourcing? I really haven't heard of any suppliers or any manufacturing happening there.
There is no manufacturing. I spent some time. This is a long time ago, traveling to the UAE, and everything is imported.
Yeah.
I don't know if the other panelists are no different, but I'm not aware of any manufacturing. Aside from sand, water, being done in the UAE. I don't know if the other panelists have a different on that.
Renaud, anything?
Yeah, but there is some manufacturing actually in different economic regions, all the way from Abu Dhabi to Ras Al Khaimah. I've been around for various projects. Usually, it's very new and very specific on maybe one or two product categories. They try to obviously make use of the raw materials there and the low energy costs. If you're an e-commerce buyer, I would say there's really not much for you typically, right? Yeah. If you are more of an industrial buyer or buying in large quantities, they might actually set up a wool factory for you if you have the volume. But if you come as an e-commerce buyer, I would not say it's your first destination.
I actually agree with what Renaud has mentioned, because I was just going to add one more thing from the difference between the e-commerce and the industrial, because from a sourcing professional talent area, we've seen a lot of these professionals more from the industrial side. So we believe there are activities going on there, but not that much in terms of the e-commerce space. We've seen a lot of the industrial, whether it's like from the oil and gas or whether it's from the heavy industrials. Yeah, you have a lot of those sourcing that actually happens there, but not much in the I'll say the retail or the e-commerce space.
Right. So we have 2 minutes before we need to end. I want to go around the panelists and ask you one question. So what is your one piece of advice for importers sourcing from China and Asia in coming months? Regina, go first.
Yeah, look, just build those relationships. Really go deep and build relationships with factories or sourcing agents, either one, that you feel comfortable, and then you can hold each other's hands moving forward.
Right. Great advice. Renaud?
Try to escape the day-to-day or week-to-week sort of news cycle, and try to do things in a slightly more structured manner. Try to, if possible, put some numbers together. I alluded to that a little bit before. Try to know your supply chain. Try to know your risks, and try to put your supply chain, in front of that and structure it the right way, I would say.
Great advice. Patrick?
I think I'll go towards the recruitment bit, or like the training, the skill set bit. I believe now would be a good time for. With the whole pandemic, there's been a lot of lost time, so now could be a good time for importers to, grow their network, upskilling themselves, whether it's taking up an extra class online on like basically our tools, or whether it's like different strategies. Because right now I think it would be a good time to further understand a little bit more, and also to just upskill themselves and grow their network, because these are two things that would be business critical going forward in the next I believe 3, 4, 5 years. Now it's basically how are you able to upskill yourself, and how are you able to further expand your network globally, or even like in the region.
Right. Great advice. Well, thank you so much, Regina, Renaud, Patrick, for your insights and for sharing your knowledge. All right, everyone. So that's the end of this panel discussion. And please stay around for a supplier stories session.